Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. It is FPC Radio Live. It's Thursday, December 28th. We got just a couple more days in this 2023 calendar year, and we're winding down the NFL season as well, John. So it's pretty nice if you're a Patriots fan. Enjoy the last couple weeks because this is it. No January playoffs this year. If you're Russell Wilson, apparently your season's already over, despite kind of still being in the playoff hunt. They decided to sit him down for a number of reasons. But, John, it's I can't help, and this is coming from me, someone who's kind of railed on Russell Wilson for a while now. I can't help but feel bad for the guy. I don't know. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's pity, maybe it's sympathy. I don't know what it is. Empathy, whatever the case may be. I actually kind of feel bad for him. Maybe, John, it's just because Sean Payton's a giant a-hole, and I'd rather be on the side of Russell Wilson than Sean Payton. Actually, you know what? I think that's the reason because, again, we understand why they're doing it. They're basically trying to, preserve him so he doesn't get injured, and then he gets paid his contract next year, and yada yada yada, all that stuff. Look, I mean, from the beginning, John, from the get-go, it was very clear that Sean Payton did not want Russell Wilson. The passive aggressiveness, the aggressive aggressiveness, whatever you want to call it, there's been both, has been very evident. I mean, his comments, Peyton's that is, just the other day, yesterday, I believe, about, well, I can't go out and get 5 new offensive linemen and 5 new receivers and all that stuff. I mean, it's like, okay, guy, you're the coach of the only modern team to give up 70 points, allow 70 points. Maybe you take a step back and look in the mirror a little bit. But yeah, look, at the end of the day, I kind of feel a little bit bad for Russell Wilson.
I do as well. And again, in terms of the a-hole medal stand, clearly Sean Payton wins the gold. Russell Wilson the silver, and I don't know who wins the bronze among the Denver Broncos. But yeah, you look at this, and he hasn't played that poorly this year. I think 26 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. Team got off to a god-awful start, mostly because their defense was just historically bad. They kind of crept back into it, and now they've fallen back, and they have like a 2% chance to get into the playoffs. They're at 7-8, and they've decided to sit him down strictly for financial reasons, right? Because if he gets injured and can't pass the physical in March, then I 2025.
I think there's some other factors, but yeah, I think primarily financial reasons. But I do think there's some. Again, I just don't think Sean Payton likes him at all.
No, well, he could have done this earlier. But, I mean, again, if he gets injured and doesn't pass the physical in March, then his 2025 contract becomes guaranteed, which is $37 million. So they'd be on the hook for $76 million the next 2 seasons. So it would appear to me that they're going to move on from Russell Wilson in the offseason. This is so similar to what happened with the Vegas Raiders last year, where Derek Carr got benched the final 2 games of the season. They had already been eliminated, and of all people, Jarrett Stidham stepped in for the final few games, just like he's going to step in for the final 2 games with Denver. I guess that's his role in the NFL, make $5 million a year and finish out seasons for quarterbacks that the franchise wants to move on from. So, yeah, I think a lot of it's financial. A lot of it is that they never really clashed. They never really got together and were on the same page. And we hear that Sean Payton says, I need my quarterback to have ironclad control of the offense. And again, he was fortunate to have Drew Brees for 95% of his coaching career, and Brees is, I think, a certain Hall of Famer and a better quarterback than Russell Wilson. So let's see what Sean Payton can do in the offseason. This must have been an interesting conversation with ownership because, you're going to be paying a guy next year, and I think he's on the books in terms of the salary cap for in excess of $75 million next year. So that's going to be dead cap space that they're going to have to deal with. And you would think Denver is going to try to trade up and get one of those young quarterbacks available in the draft. So they're going to have to move more draft capital, players, whatever, to move up into the draft to get a quarterback, if that's the case, unless Jarrett Stidham all of a sudden becomes something we don't think he is.
Well, there's a certain segment of Patriots fans that thought he was going to be exactly what you're alluding to, which clearly didn't work out and won't work out for Denver. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I don't know the exact ins and outs of how this salary cap situation will work. I'm not quite sure if there's an out, if there's a way they can defer some of it, if they can, if they're just going to take a lump sum. But it's very clear that Russell Wilson is not long for this Broncos roster. I mean, I can't imagine he will be back in Denver next year. And I don't see why he would want to be back. You know what I mean? First of all, and maybe this is an unwarranted shot, but I don't think he's the type of guy who's going to sit there and say, well, you don't want me, I'm going to prove you wrong type of thing. You know what I mean? I feel like he's more of a, okay, fine, I'll just go somewhere else. And that's okay. I'm not trying to use that as a negative. I'm just saying that I don't see him as the type of guy who would, use that as motivate. You know what I'm saying? Is that fair, or is that a little out of line?
So a little differently than maybe Brady or Rodgers.
Yeah, well, like
move on from, and we're like, okay, we're going to show you that we can still play.
Right.
Maybe the guy can't play. I mean,
well, look. I told you before we started this conversation. I've been very hard on Russell Wilson, not just this year. Or this year I've actually kind of been kind of easy because, like I said, I mean, it's he's having an okay season. It's not great, not terrible. But last year, certainly I was on top of him. And I was also kind of harsh on him the year before everyone else kind of got on it. I was like, look, I mean, the guy, what I saw at the end of that second half of that season, his last season in Seattle was troubling. And that pattern has not stopped. So for me, again, I do believe he's not as good as certainly the Denver Broncos thought he was going to be, and a lot of fans and pundits thought he was going into his first season in Denver. So it's not like the guy, like I don't feel bad for him because I think he can play. Like benching him is not it's not a terrible option. It's kind of odd given where they are, but at the same time, John, and I say this all the time. I said this about AFC East teams. Sometimes you just got to be self-aware of who you are. Like I felt like they completely stunted their growth, their potential growth throughout the Brady years because they felt, well, we're this close when they really weren't. They go out, they blow money on these veterans that would not pan out, and then they'd be stuck with this money, and then the same cycle would repeat over and over again. When maybe they should have sat there and said, hey, look, we're not ready to compete in 2009 or whatever. We're going to kind of take a step back and not jump too much into it. Same thing might be with the Broncos. That just take a step back, realize you're not going to compete, move on, and see where you go. So I don't know. It's going to be it's it's going to be a while, I think, before Denver is competitive because again, like I said, I'm not quite sure about the salary cap ins and outs when it comes to this situation, but I can't believe that Denver is going to be able to, get out of this completely scot-free next year or the year after. There's going to be some sort of holdover money, and I think you just got to kind of take your lumps.
Yeah, and the money part of it's no big deal because one of the heirs to the Walton and Walmart fortune owns them. They're worth plenty of money, so that part of it is an issue. But whatever the salary,
NFL money, obviously, cap. There's cap limits in some of these guys. I mean, this $200 million is nothing to some of those guys. It's like whatever.
No, that's an accounting error. So sure, my biggest question is where does Russell Wilson play next year? I mean, he's still good enough to be an NFL starting quarterback, I believe. But we've seen after last week, we've seen 59 different starting quarterbacks this league. In this year, I think he's good enough to be a starting quarterback in the league. Now, who's the team that's going to commit to him? You're probably not going to have to give up much, if anything, to get him, right? I mean, New Orleans, did they give up anything for Derek Carr? Because he was just kind of released. Yeah. That's going to be the case probably with Russell Wilson. I mean, Atlanta, which we think is a quarterback away from being better because they don't have a quarterback or one that's competent. Who knows? I think the guy can still play. But again, we're talking about a 35-year-old who's headed in the wrong direction. And again, the issue with Russell Wilson that I think is a turnoff, he's the polar opposite of Lamar Jackson. Like Lamar Jackson appears to me to be a guy who his teammates absolutely adore. Can't you get that feeling? Like on the sideline, after games. I mean, they seem to really buy into him. He seems like one of the guys. He's a leader. Whereas Russell Wilson, I'm sure there aren't a lot of broken hearts among Denver Broncos players and fans today because the guy is kind of a put-off type guy. Well, so I think that's another issue you got to plow through with him.
Well, you remember also the kind of the circumstances surrounding his departure from Seattle, the words with Richard Sherman and some of the defense. And, you heard these stories and look, you always have to take these things with a little bit of, with a grain of salt. I mean, it's like the, Tom Brady locked Jimmy G out of the TB12. Like that's just again, that's a game of telephone that went about 16 rounds, and that's what you came up with, and that's how I feel. And
That'd be
like,
a fun story, wouldn't it be? And I always said that Brady was jealous of Garoppolo only because Garoppolo's better looking.
yeah, well, and kind of to the point with what I was talking about with Russell Wilson and not wanting to kind of face that adversity head on. Like that reaction of quote unquote locking Jimmy G out and being threatened by Jimmy Garoppolo is the polar opposite of what we know Tom Brady as. Because I mean, just go to his just reference his time at Michigan. I mean, that's a guy who, and he talked about this where he had doubts. I think he went and saw a sports psychologist or psychologist on campus. The kid Brady was very aged well beyond his years, even at 20 years old, or at least in terms of, recognizing aspects beyond just the physical nature of sports. And eventually he took that Drew Henson thing head on, and we know how everything worked out. Again, like I said, I don't see necessarily Russell Wilson as that type of guy. So I don't know. I mean, again, he needs a fresh start somewhere. I'm not blaming him for wanting that. I'd probably want that for myself too. And at this point, where are you going to go? Well, you're probably just going to be an aging veteran on a mediocre team. I mean, that's what, like you mentioned, Atlanta. Russell Wilson might make Atlanta better because, well, their quarterback play has been abysmal. Is he a stopgap veteran for a team that's looking for the quarterback of the future? Maybe, but I don't see the Patriots having any interest. That's a team that is probably or could probably look at a veteran as opposed, depending on how they feel about these rookies, as a guy who will kind of carry the ship for a year or two. You know what I mean? But I don't see them seeing Russell Wilson as that guy. So how many teams out there? Look, there are going to be teams out there, John. We have 14 backups start this year. So there's bound to be some team out there that's going to have an interest in him. I just don't think it's going to get any better. There's not really a situation out there that's going to get much better for Russell Wilson. And kind of, again, to your point about the teammates not necessarily buying into him or loving him as much. I mean, we heard, I was getting to the story I was getting to or going to point to after I went off on that little Tom Brady tangent was he had his own office and he was kind of very, secluded from the rest of the team. And that's not something you want from a quarterback,
No.
And
Brett Favre had his own dressing room when his year with the Jets. That's kind of a turnoff for other players. You want to be one of the guys. You are the leader. You're the CEO. But you want the offensive linemen to buy into you because they're the ones protecting you. We always heard that these high-end quarterbacks take the offensive line out to dinner on Monday night because Tuesday's the day off. They, put out the credit card and spend $3,000 on feeding these big boys and having to make sure that they have a good time because they know come Sunday they're going to put a little extra into protecting their quarterback.
Yeah, and look, I mean that's part of the game, that's being a leader, that's being a quarterback. And, if you're Russell Wilson, fortunately for you, you have a couple Super Bowl appearances and a Super Bowl ring, and that can never be taken from you. Really, unless it's a Heisman Trophy, you're pretty much holding on to your, to your wins. But yeah, it's an interesting, just a timeline for Russell Wilson and perhaps, John, a cautionary tale, so to speak, for one Patrick Mahomes. And I'm not saying that he's going to fall off a cliff like Russell Wilson appears to be, but as you age and these quarterbacks that rely so much on their athleticism, when that's maybe not gone, but maybe not there as much as it was, you better be able to find different ways to play football. And that I'm not saying a Chiefs fan should panic, but I'm saying that, as Patrick Mahomes gets closer and closer to 30, 31, you hope that his game evolves a little bit more than trying to play backyard football. And it seemed like it did for a while. This season has, I feel, taken a little bit of a step back, but if you're a Chiefs fan, you're like, okay, let's the running around is nice. The athleticism is nice. This applies to Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson as well. I mean, it's not just Patrick Mahomes, but eventually you're going to have to evolve because, I mean, eventually you're going to lose your legs, John. And there's really nothing you can do about it. The reason Tom Brady was able to evolve was, well, one, he was, like you call him all the time, he was psychotic. So, he probably took care of his body more than anyone else, but it really wasn't about his legs. It was about his mind. And that's something that's not going to slow down at 30, 31, or you would hope not. Some people it does, but if you're sharp and smart enough, you can overcome deficiencies. Now, Brady happened to still have an incredibly strong arm in his mid 40s, which is another incredible thing that you can talk about when it comes to making his case as the when you're talking about the greatest players ever. Well, his ability to do what he did at a later age is part of the impressive thing, but I don't believe he would have done it if he was a athletic quarterback in terms of running and making plays outside the pocket and doing all that stuff, because like I said, eventually your legs just aren't going to keep up with the rest of you, especially your mind.
Yeah, and I think all quarterbacks obviously have to work on their legs anyway, even if they're pocket passes, because so much of the arm strength is tied into leg strength. So obviously, these guys work on all parts of their body to make sure that they're at their highest level.
But that real quick, that in pocket stuff though, that's I would say it's 50% legs, 50% brain. Whereas like when you leave the pocket, you are relying on your athleticism. And again, that's just something that doesn't necessarily always stick around, and you got to evolve. So, but go ahead.
No, absolutely. Unless you're LeBron James, who's still one of the best athletes in the league at 39. See, you had to bring Brady into the conversation.
Well, no. Look, I agree with you. I mean, I think those
are freaks. Those guys
exactly.
are really freaks.
And we've seen it for so long.
Anybody to any of those guys is almost a waste of. It's like there's just. I hate using that term unicorn, but that's really what Brady and LeBron are, because we've never seen this before, and they never see it again.
And it's not just about longevity. It's about what they're doing or did.
Oh, yeah.
At a later age, because, you got guys that stick around. Look at the NBA. Udonis Haslem. I mean, he's been in the news the last couple of days for some interesting comments. But nonetheless,
ridiculous comments. Absolutely ridiculous.
It's so ignorant. It really is what it is. It's just ignorance.
He's director of player development, right? So I would think part of being the director of player development is to maybe educate young players on who Bill Russell was, not just as a player. We all know that the 11 championships, that's not even the most important thing the man contributed to society. Like, how ridiculous is that? Look, 42 is retired in baseball for a reason. 6 is retired in basketball for a reason, not because they were necessarily the greatest players, although you can make a case that Russell was, but because of what they meant to their sport.
Right.
And to kind of push back on that is just, it's sickening, actually.
It really, like I said, it's ignorant. It's like, just,
it is. Stupid, or maybe the guy just wanted to say something absolutely ludicrous so people would reference his podcast.
Yeah,
that happens a lot.
Maybe. I mean, that's pretty much the nature of the game, isn't it, John? So, I mean, I again, it's you can't expect the same thing. And that's why I always say that, like, quit wasting your time projecting what Patrick Mahomes will do, because there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee. There's one player right now, Aaron Rodgers, who is approaching 40 years old, or he is 40 years old and still technically in the league. But look at everyone else, the majority of players. I mean, again, another guy that, you would consider one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play. And I'd be greatly concerned about what he does coming back next year. There is no guarantee in my mind that he's going to be an effective quarterback. And a lot of it has to do with the injury, the age, and everything to do with that. Every other quarterback.
I mean, it's going to be interesting. You're sitting out a year, which that's not the easiest thing to do at 40.
No.
Right. So, the muscle memory has to come back. I think he can still be a very good quarterback. Is he going to be, top 5 quarterback? I don't know. We'll have to see what happens with that. But generally, very few quarterbacks I've seen. Obviously, Brady was one. Warren Moon was another guy who it didn't appear to me that lost anything into his early 40s. He still threw. There's a guy I think people should just go on YouTube and watch some of his highlights. That man threw about as nice a ball as you'll ever see, and I think he was an outstanding quarterback. He really was. Because think about all the pressure he was under when he came from Canada to the NFL. It was like, oh wow, there's a black quarterback starting in the NFL, and you know what? He doesn't just run around. He's actually a pocket guy who has a great arm, and you know his skill set was excellent, and it was excellent until he was 40, 41 years old. So it's a rarity. It just doesn't happen. It's not meant to happen.
No, and again, that's such a high rate too. It's almost near impossible because it's like you look at, you know, it's someone, I think I read it on Twitter and I'm kind of paraphrasing it right now, so it's not, you know, not word for word, but like everything that you know Patrick Mahomes has done to this point, you know, let's assume they don't win a Super Bowl this year, and you know, 6 years is a really nice sample size, really a lot of success. He would have to do that again, and then for a third time, essentially,
right, 3 more times, yeah,
to
what he's accomplished in the first 6 years.
Approach what Brady has done. So when you think of it in terms of that, it's just it seems so outrageously impossible. And the reason it is because, well, again, no matter how different the league gets and how much they protect quarterbacks, you know, again, you hit a certain age. I mean, it's still a physical sport, and not necessarily on Sundays, but it's throughout the week. It's the training, it's the you know, it's the mental preparation, it's all that stuff. And as you age, look, your legs are going to go. You know, you can overcome, like you can make your arms, keep your arms strong. That's it's the legs that really are what goes. And when you lose those, you lose the ability to drive the ball. You lose the ability to move properly. All those things. Fortunately, again, the reason why Brady played as long as he was is because he, like you said, he's a unicorn. That's not normal. So trying to hold everyone to that standard or say, oh, yeah, well, Brady did it, of course he's going to do it. Well, no, of course he's not going to do it. I mean, we may never see someone do it. And look, Drew Brees made it to 41. By the time he was done, John. Like,
oh, he was caught.
Brady didn't have
really more than 20 yards. Yeah.
Yeah, Brady didn't have the best season in 2022, but there wasn't a very clear physical decline, which again is still impressive, and you can argue he still went out relatively at the top of his game. But with like Drew Brees, I mean, you saw he was I mean, obviously Peyton Manning was beyond cooked by the time he retired before 40. So, you know, to assume that these guys, especially these running athletic quarterbacks, are going to maintain this level of production, first of all, and do it for, you know, in this case, 12, 13, 14 more years. Well, that's kind of silly and it's kind of outrageous. So, but you know, that's where we're at right now with this. And, you know, to bring it all back to Russell Wilson, again, cautionary tale, because a couple years ago, most people were talking about Russell Wilson, not, you know, necessarily as one of the greatest of all time, but one of the best in the league at the time. And I don't think anyone could have foreseen this sort of drop so quickly. And it did happen quickly, John. It just you know, first half of that last season in Seattle, he was an MVP candidate, and then boom.
And he suffered that injury right when he broke his finger.
Yep.
And probably came back a bit too soon. I would assume that it's healed at this point, you know, 2 years later. But, you know, who knows? Again, a lot of it has to do with the legs. And just think about how consequential Super Bowl 49 was, right? Because at that point, Tom Brady had 3 Super Bowls, and Russell Wilson was the reigning Super Bowl champion. If they punched that ball in instead of throwing the interception to Malcolm Butler, all of a sudden it's Brady 3-3 in Super Bowls, Russell Wilson 2-0. He's the guy that's, you know, the darling of the league. And
oh, sure,
who knows? Who knows what happens going forward at that point? You know, with the Patriots try to make drastic changes and whatever the case may be, and Seattle's trying to win a three-peat with, you know, that great defense. It's just like two franchises just flip on that one play.
Mm-hmm. No, and really, the momentum swings across really 2 plays, because that the the play down the sidelines that really set up that goal to go situation was fluky, lucky, whatever you want to call it, just kind of a
David Tyree part 2.
yeah,
right?
and everyone who watched it was sitting there saying like, oh my god, it happened again, and you know what, that's why when I push back about, because you got idiots out there that say like, oh, the defense did this, the defense did that. Oh, Malcolm Butler saved Tom Brady. No, Malcolm Butler saved the Patriots defense from a disastrous collapse in the closing minutes of a Super Bowl again. So like that because look, the fluke pass was fluky. I mean, what can you do about it? Like, I mean, you have I can't remember who it was now, jumping over him to avoid like any sort of like post play injury to him or tripping over him, and in that case he jumped past the ball and let the ball fall. But the worst play of that was allowing that swing pass right before the 2-minute warning, John.
Oh man,
it was
they didn't even cover Marshawn Lynch on that play.
And you're sitting there and you got morons. I say morons, and I mean it, but you got idiots out there telling me, oh, Malcolm Butler saved Tom Brady. Like, no, like that is not the case. I mean, they gave up they made a terrible play call or effort or whatever you want to call it on that swing route or that wheel route. The unlucky play on the sidelines. What can you do about it? But it's like in some cases, John, that's like, okay, you kind of create your own luck. You gave up that big play before the 2-minute warning. You opened the door for things like this to happen, because before that, it felt like, yeah, they had the 2-minute warning, but you were kind of backed up. Like you really there was a long way to go for the Seahawks. Then in a matter of 2 seconds, it was like, oh my God, they're knocking on the door already.
I've said this many times, Ian. In the first 5 Patriots Super Bowls with Belichick and Brady, Belichick's defense gave up 62 points in the fourth quarter in 5 games, which is an average of about 13 points per game. 14 against the Rams in the first Super Bowl, 19 against Carolina in the second Super Bowl, 7 against the Eagles in the third Super Bowl, then 14-8 in the 2 Giants games. So the defense was good for 3 quarters, and then it wasn't in the fourth quarter. And on several occasions, Brady had to come back and lead a comeback. And then obviously the Seattle game, they're down 10 going in the fourth quarter against the best defense of that era, and he is perfect in the fourth quarter. 13 for 15 for 125. That's as close to perfect as you can get against that defense, knowing that he had to pass the football down 10 points. So, I mean,
that's the best. That's the best part about it is like, it's like there's no doubt that they were going to throw the ball. They just couldn't stop it. You know. And look, these. I mean, you go back, you watch some of the throws and the placement, and like the minuscule windows that he had. Again, when I think of near perfect quarterback play, I think about the fourth quarters in both, that Seattle and then Falcons Super Bowl and then overtime. And it's just like that's some of the best quarterback play I've ever seen in my life. And back in two different Super Bowl fourth quarters. So
and it had to be right.
And it had to be
one bad play in either game they lose.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. I mean, then all of a sudden. And like I said, how consequential that Seattle Super Bowl was. All of a sudden, let's not forget, they scored, 14 and 17 in Super Bowls against the Giants. They had 14 against Seattle going in the fourth quarter. If they don't score in the fourth quarter, now you're saying, man, Brady's 3-3 in Super Bowls, which is still amazing to get to 6 of them. But now he's pretty similar to John Elway, who's 2-3 in Super Bowls. So, and he's heading in the wrong direction. And of course, he's in the debate as one of the greatest of all time, but he hadn't surpassed Joe Montana at that point. When he won that game in the fashion he won it, that's when I said, okay, this guy's the greatest quarterback of all time. Then he wins 3 more Super Bowls. So, where is the discussion?
Yeah, and a bunch of, it's been a lot of icing on the cake since. So, like
massive icing.
Like he does it in Super. Then all of a sudden, it's like he goes out and wins in against the Falcons. You're like, okay, well it's clearly. Then he goes out and plays against the Eagles, and albeit a loss, goes for 500 yards and is one play short of being perfect. And they literally needed him to be perfect in that game because they couldn't force a punt. And then to top it off, you think he goes out and wins another Super Bowl and then goes to the Bucs and wins the Super Bowl in his first season. So it's pretty crazy. Anyways, see, this is what happens.
You've got a big smile on your face
I do.
right now.
I have a huge smile on my face right now. And, this is what usually happens. We have a couple things we want to talk about, and then it just go down a rabbit hole. But that's going to do it for us here today, though. Tomorrow we'll be back to have our last show of 2023, and we'll preview week 16 or 17 rather, give our picks and everything like that, and maybe we'll have some fun with it. So thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.